and welcome to the Houston Real Estate Talk here with Chris Oelfke. He's a licensed inspector, and I've known Chris for at least 8 years now, right?
It's been about that, yeah.
Very good. Welcome, Chris, to the Houston Real Estate Talk. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Good. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and the business that you do?
I have been a TREC, Texas Real Estate Commission professional inspector since 2005, and I've worked primarily in the greater Houston area. I've done some work outside of Houston. I've been to Austin and other central Texas areas, but almost all of the work has been in Houston or the surrounding areas. Okay. And it's a full-time business since January of 2005.
Very good. Well, I appreciate all of your help. Since I've known you, I refer you to all of my clients, and I know you've been wonderful with all of them. Everybody has great things to say about your business and your services,
Yeah,
so
well,
thank you.
Thank you for the referrals.
Absolutely. Tell me a little bit about inspecting a home. What are those things that people constantly ask you and they're concerned about?
Sure. They watch a lot of television programs, so they, the non-seasoned, the beginner homeowner has a lot of preconceived notions. But the one I get a lot is the foundation. The first thing they ask is, how is the foundation? And they look for cracks in the drywall, even if they're very small hairline cracks. They assume that they have a problem. I think maybe a lot of TV commercials for foundation repair also kind of get them excited about that. And a lot of times it is a sign of some settlement movement of the structure or the foundation. But that's the big one. The other big one is probably the air conditioning system and the roof. And those are three really important systems of a house, of course, and they also can be expensive to repair or replace those systems. So those are the big ones. The foundation is everybody's favorite. Right. The whole concept of a roof over your head kind of comes into play. And then being in Houston, the air conditioning has to work. Otherwise, nobody's happy. Right. So those are the big items. Beyond that, I think a lot of people don't really know what we're looking at or how the process works. Right. Unless they've owned several homes and have been through the process, they don't typically have any kind of concept of what we're looking at. And they're usually very curious. Sure. 9 out of 10 times they want to be at the inspection and see what I'm doing, participate, and see how it goes. And then if they're engineers and they work in the engineering field, they really get involved, and it's more conversations and a deeper look, which is always fun. Right. And what you do, it's mainly structural inspection. And what does a structural inspection include? Well, they call it mechanical and structural. Okay. I would say it goes beyond that, because you have systems like the plumbing system, water supply and drainage, and the electrical system. So you always hear people refer to a home inspection as the mechanical structural inspection. Those are the big items, but it goes from the foundation, the exterior walls, doors, windows, the roof structure, any framing that you see. To finer points like, is the attic ventilated properly? Is it insulated? The condition of the structural members. Most of the times in a final or a finished resale home, you can't see the majority of the framing. It's covered up by the siding and the drywall, but the attic gives you a good look at it. So those are the structural components. But it goes beyond that. You say mechanical, well, that means heating and air conditioning systems, water heating, all the various appliances. So it even goes beyond that. The Texas Real Estate Commission has a standards of practice. Okay. It includes doors, windows, flooring, exterior siding, as we mentioned, the attic. Right. So it's a little bit above and beyond that. I always tell people on the phone that it's pretty complete. It's a pretty a good overall look at the house without dismantling anything or tearing open any walls. Right. And that's, now that you mentioned tearing or opening any walls, people say, so how do I know that behind the wall there's no mold or things like that? And I'm like, well, the inspector is not going to be able to make a hole in the wall, right? Right. So how do you handle those type of questions? If they really ask a lot of questions and really want to know what's included, what's not, we can always turn them to the Texas Real Estate Commission website, where they can access the standards of practice for home inspectors. Okay. So everything is listed and exclusions are listed, what we don't do. I try not to get too far into that, because it's not, it just leaves doubt, I guess, sometimes, if they're really worrying about that. But you can't see inside the walls. If a house has a considerable amount of mold, usually you smell it or see it.
Okay. So it's obvious most of the time.
Generally, yeah. Well, mold is everywhere.
Yes.
And I tell people, if you hire someone to do air sampling, they'll and then send that to a laboratory for analysis, you'll see how much mold is in the house.
Okay.
But there are allowances and expectations of
Right.
how many mold spores they detect.
I see.
The mold that we worry about is the stuff that's a colony of spores that's really taken off and it's thriving in the warm, wet environment where it's growing, and you can see it, you can smell it. If it's latent, if it's inside a wall, we won't see it.
Okay.
Hopefully we'll see signs of water penetration somewhere with some stains, and we can determine where that moisture source is, whether it's a roof leak, a plumbing leak,
or through the windows.
Through the
or
window,
something.
yeah, you get condensation around doors and windows.
Okay.
You see mold in attics where it's not properly ventilated, or you have an exhaust fan from a bathroom terminating into an attic. You can get mold there.
Okay.
Condensation off of air conditioning equipment is pretty common. So there's a lot of sources, but mold is universal. It's indoors, it's outdoors. It's just when you get the right types of mold that are flourishing and thriving because of a warm, wet environment.
I see.
You limit. My take on mold is, let's find the underlying source. Why is the mold enjoying this place or this
the
climate?
environment? Yes.
Yeah, the environment is key. So let's determine where the moisture is coming from and repair those issues.
Right. I'm pretty sure that due to the flood 2 years ago in Houston, you had a lot of concern about mold, and a lot of people call asking lots of questions about that.
That was the most popular question immediately following. For I'd say up until recently, people were still wondering. So they would buy a house that had been rehabilitated and remediated.
Right. And
say,
how do they know?
See signs of mold? And generally, as long as we go through and don't see any stains or damage, we can look with the infrared camera. It's not the best moisture sensor. Then I have a surface non-destructive moisture meter that we can put on different surfaces. But if you didn't see it, if you didn't smell it, it generally indicated they probably did a decent remediation.
Okay.
Short of getting an air quality analysis done, it's generally a visual. And a smell test if you walk into a house.
That's really good to know.
Yeah, the majority of people that did remodel houses after flooding, they tore all of the drywall out, all of the insulation, a lot of the flooring got replaced. Right. The wood structure, the framing, that's solid wood. As long as they dehumidified properly and treated it, you shouldn't have an ongoing problem unless it gets wet again.
Right. I've read, obviously through my licensing, that people can remedy their own mold, right? In some cases. Yeah. So you don't have to hire a company to do the remedy. You can do it yourself.
I think it depends on the scope of the problem. If you have a really big issue, then you might want to hire a qualified contractor.
It's not like you're going to spray.
If you found out why is this area moldy, repaired the source of the moisture, and then bought an antimicrobial product. They sell them at Home Depot of varying degrees. You can also get them online. As long as you find something that kills and prevents mold is the key.
Right.
But it should be dried. And if, of course, there's any damage, you can replace drywall. If it gets wet, and it has been wet for a while, you should probably just replace the drywall, which is a relatively minor repair.
Of course. And going back to the mechanical inspection, then if there's a washer, dryer, dishwasher, all of that you will inspect. That's all included in that.
Not necessarily the washer and dryer.
Okay.
I like to put washing machine hoses on the supply lines and hose bibs and run water through there.
Okay.
However, a lot of times people take those appliances with them, but dishwashers, ovens, stoves, and cooktops, exhaust fans, the majority of the appliances are tested.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Very good. And moving a little bit far from all of these, and it just comes to my mind, and I'm not going down specifically the list of the questions in the specific order. I think about codes, and this is a big issue because the code that was okay last year not necessarily is the one that applies for 2019 or 20, or it'll be effective in 2020. Tell me a little bit, what's that code? What is it for? Why it changes? And how there's thousands, right?
There are, the latest edition of the IRC, the International Residential Code Book's almost 1,000 pages.
Oh my God.
And then they have specialty books. There's the National Electric Code Book, which kind of ties in with IRC, but it gets more finely detailed.
Okay.
There's the Uniform Plumbing Code. There's the National Fire Protection Association. So there's a lot of different areas.
Right.
But generally what the codes are are an agreed upon set of standards for building. And it's the book that I use is the International Residential Code. So it's kind of an agreed upon, I don't know how many different nations, but certainly US and Canada follow it. And every 3 years, the International Code Council gets together and they make changes or additions to it. And they put out a new version. The latest one that I have is 2018, so we can expect another one in 2021. But the different municipalities, when someone is building new construction, or if you're remodeling or adding on to your house in a significant manner, they will contact the city and apply for permits, and then they get their municipal code authority involved to go through the different systems. On new construction, it's several different inspections, from structural to electrical, mechanical, and plumbing. But it's important. Without codes, if people are just left to their own devices to build, you could build a tree house and then try to sell it to somebody, or you could build something that was pretty decent, but maybe there was insufficient emergency exits or egress, as they call it. A lot of it has to do with fire protection, electrical safety standards. It's pretty detailed. I suppose one misconception a lot of people have is that TREC inspectors aren't necessarily code certified, as I'm not either. But there's some overlap. The Texas Real Estate Commission, they base a lot of their standards of practice on code items. So there is some overlap, and it's valuable to, even if you're not code certified, to study some of the codes and reference not specific codes. We probably shouldn't be doing that, but saying current standards require this. That's a funny thing when you deal with builders. If I go and I do an inspection on a new construction property, oftentimes I get a call from the buyer or the builder saying, well, this passed the code. We're not fixing this because it passed code. And I say, well, that's not necessarily a code item, but it's going to remain in the report. The buyer will be happier if the window is not binding or the cabinet doors are set square. So depending on the age of the home, codes apply in different manners. If you're inspecting a house built in 1968 or something, a lot of those codes certainly don't apply. Of course. Window heights or aluminum wiring, things like that. You bring them to the attention of the buyer, but there's no enforcement from the TREC inspection. We can't require that the seller brings their house up to code. Otherwise, it would be... It's
almost impossible. It's redoing almost the whole house.
You wouldn't make any money in the sale, and it would take a long time to get everything corrected. But the goal for a TREC inspection, the report that I provide, is to at least inform the buyer this was okay when it was built. It's not safe by the current standards. Work with it as is and just be aware, or make corrections as you go.
And I think the biggest issue when looking at a report and going back to the codes is the house is not new built, is the electrical, the panels, the electrical.
The electrical system is outdated.
And a lot of buyers, especially first-time home buyers, do expect the seller to replace or redo the whole system. And it's really, like you just mentioned, it's really expensive in most cases.
It can be, yeah. Certainly if you replace a circuit breaker panel or service panel, that could cost $1,000, sometimes even more. If a house is wired with aluminum wiring, you don't necessarily have to rewire the entire house. It's an option, but that's a little bit more expensive. They can be remediated by a qualified electrical contractor to be a safer system. So there's a lot of difference. Every house is different, but you need to communicate with the buyer. If it's a buyer, sometimes it's a seller, but you have to communicate with the person that's hiring me to, what is the issue and what are the solutions to the problem? How can this be a safer system?
It makes sense. And in those houses that flooded, that they have to tear down, all the walls and all of that, did you see sellers redoing the electrical since they were already open and exposed?
A lot of them did. If the outlet was underwater and submerged in water for any amount of time, it should have been replaced. You would get oxidation in all the different contacts inside of the outlet, and that can cause a problem with connectivity and things such as series arcing and short circuiting and things like that. If an outlet's damaged, it should have been replaced.
Of course. GFCI outlets, especially in the kitchen, before, what was the year that it wasn't really required, and now
they've been around since the 90s, but they keep adding locations for required ground fault circuit interrupters. Even prior to the 90s, I think they required them at kitchen counters. Generally speaking, what they're for is any wet location where you could plug in, say in the bathroom, you could plug a radio in.
Or a blow dryer.
Or a blow dryer, set it on the edge of a sink or a bathtub. If the appliance falls into the water, someone could be injured, or worse. Anywhere there's a potential for water and electrical items being plugged in. That includes the kitchen, the garage, outdoor outlets, and they've added, the laundry room and your dishwasher are also required to be ground fault. Yeah, if something's leaking, you're standing in a puddle of water and you're operating the appliance, you could be electrocuted.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's good even on an older house when they weren't required to inform them. Well, we don't have that. If they have a small child that takes baths or whatever, and the kid's not thinking, you want to get the person buying the home thinking about the different safety features or the lack of in the house, so they're informed.
What other misconception comes to mind from buyers, especially? And I'm sure that it has different levels. First-time home buyers might be different from experienced buyers, right?
Yes, usually they are. If you've owned a home for a number of years or bought several different properties, you've had to repair things and you've hired contractors. If you've lived in an apartment and have never had to worry about it, it's your first time, you don't think of very much usually. Beyond does it look nice, and then when something goes wrong, you suddenly get educated and learn about plumbing or electrical items. That's not everybody, but a lot of people don't worry about why does the water come out when I open the faucet, or when I hit the light switch, why does it come on? Some people don't think of that at all.
Right.
I'm not sure what the misconceptions are. There's just an example that comes to mind might be somebody that's buying. My favorite inspections are when it's a rehabbed house. An investor's bought an old property and they've done mostly a cosmetic rehab. They've replaced floors and painted and done cabinets and put new appliances in. Which is a facelift. That's how I call it. It typically is. A lot of times they'll go a little bit beyond that, but the quality of workmanship varies. I've seen some remodels or rehabs or flips. I call them flips. I've seen some excellent ones, but I've also seen some where it's like, well, they probably should have done a better job on the plumbing, and they messed up here on the roof, because they're in it to make a profit, which makes sense. And they might do some of the work themselves or hire somebody that hasn't really that doesn't specialize in roofing or plumbing. So it's good to get into those houses. They're my favorite ones because a lot of times it is a new home buyer that maybe not be that experienced, and you can show them this looks really good. This here needs attention, and this is a problem. And they can get discouraged. They tend to get discouraged faster than somebody that has a bit more experience as a homeowner. I see. But I don't think that's necessarily bad. It's important that we found the issue and we can bring it to their attention. Right. And they can go back to the seller and say, hey, let's fix this so we can go forward and buy this nice looking house and have a good experience with it, that it's safe. And everything works the way that it should. Right. Yeah. It makes total sense. Very good. How often is it? Every time I go to a resale, there's always plumbing issues, at least a leak in the sink, in the bathroom, or in the kitchen, or whatever. Is that really? It's probably my experience. No, it's quite common actually. Yes. I think that these I would call them mostly handyman type jobs. And I'm always surprised when I turn on a bathroom sink and there's water coming out. It's like they hooked up the PVC drain tailpiece to the trap, but they didn't tighten it well enough. Okay. Or they didn't even bother to check to see if it leaks. Right. So it's it is common, and they really are trying to minimize expense. Okay. And when you hire a licensed plumber, they charge a lot for their work, which they deserve to. They're good at what they do, and they're tradesmen. But a lot of them aren't going to hire a plumber. A licensed plumber and a licensed electrician, because you kind of get into those. It's a funny market. Those are like I said, every house is different. If it's a flip, it's going to be different than new construction. Right. Then it's going to be different to say a family lived in the house for 30 years and then they're selling it. It's going to be a different experience every time. For sure. Usually, how long does it take an inspection from start to end? The bare minimum would be 3 hours. 3 hours. I would say even on a small condominium unit, it's usually at least 2.5 or 3 hours. Right. That's a really fast inspection. I'm frequently in let's say an average size 2,000 square foot house, anywhere from 4 to 5 hours. Okay. If they're larger or older or need more repair, it could take anywhere from 6 hours or more. Then you get into houses that are 10,000 square feet and beyond, and then I've spent 2 different days in a property before. Right. So they're all different, but I would say anywhere from 3 to 5 hours is the average. inspection time for the majority of the houses that I look at.
Okay.
I try not to make too big of a commitment to time frame. I just like to make sure everybody's aware that we're going to go through and test all the different systems and look at all the areas of the house until I've gotten all the notes and photographs that I need to make a good report, and that the buyer has all of their questions answered. It doesn't pay to hurry through an inspection. There's no reason to hurry. And oftentimes that can be frustrating for a seller if they have kids or dogs or a dinner party planned.
To be out all that long.
It can be a little bit of a hassle, but communication is the key in all of these things. The realtors play a part in that. The buyers and sellers need to have a little bit of an expectation. It's funny when, as a buyer, they're like, no, take your time, go through it. The seller's like, hey, you've been here for 3 hours.
I need to go back home.
The deal? But then they go to their inspection for the property they're buying, and they're suddenly on the other side of the
They want more time.
So everybody has to be fair.
Of course.
And you can't go into a 1,500 square foot house and sit there for 7 hours. That's a little bit
of course.
Crazy.
Excessive, probably.
It's a bit excessive. Yeah. It's not fair.
Yes. You mentioned reports. Let's talk about a little bit about reports. I always tell my clients, expect at least 20, 30 pages or so. And because you have to go down a list of items, and everybody thinks, oh my gosh, that many pages, the house is going to fall, it's falling apart. And it's not the case. You just go down a list, right? A standard list that you probably follow. Is that correct?
Well, the Texas Real Estate Commission has a form that we're required to use.
Okay.
And that form kind of leaves itself open to interpretation. So every inspector is a little bit different. On the short end, to be in compliance with the Texas Real Estate Commission, you could issue, I think if you send out the report completely blank, it's like 6 pages, not filled out.
Wow.
And there's 2 components. There's the checklist where you check inspected, not present, or deficient.
Right.
Those boxes will be checked accordingly. And then there's a bit of space for narrative description where you can write in what the issues are. Now, every inspector is a little bit different. Some of the guys are turning in, 8 and 10 page reports with mostly just the checklist done. Maybe it has photographs, maybe it doesn't. They're not required still. Some people argue that they don't want to put photographs in. I've seen 80 and 90 plus page reports, which, in my opinion, my theory is that it's a little bit daunting. It's a lot to digest for a home buyer. And unless a house really needs that much description of deficiency, it's probably a little bit of excessive. In my opinion, it's a bit unwieldy.
I agree.
If a home buyer isn't used to looking at that type of a document and they get this, virtual book.
Oh my God.
There's usually a lot of really good information in those, but it can be a little bit much. I try to hit a balance between being concise but also thorough and descriptive,
of course,
so they can see what's wrong. I also put some brief descriptions of just the general construction of the house, what's present, what's not present, what are the features of the roof structure and the attic, what type of ventilation. So everything in the report's not necessarily a bad thing, but it should be descriptive, and their questions should be answered. Communication really is the key. You have to know what you're looking at and be, trained, informed, and knowledgeable about these different systems. But then you have to turn around and be able to put it into a document that people can use and understand. The realtors will probably be looking at it. The buyers should definitely be looking at it, although sometimes it looks like they might not. And then a lot of times it's used as a negotiating tool with the other party. So it should be something that's legible and should make sense, but still be sort of specific to the issue. That's why every time I work with somebody, I issue a report, say, please, if you have any questions at any point, feel free to call so we can discuss it or answer any questions that they might have.
Of course.
And realtors included. If it's a document that's being used, it's better if everything's clear.
And I've called you several times when I don't understand something from the reports. And one thing that I really appreciate from your reports is the summary section that you include at the end of the report. That really helps a lot.
The software generates a summary. It is interesting. You can sort of just tear out the first 2/3 of it and just go with the summary
I go straight to the point. This is what really matters here.
Back to the thoroughness of it. I mean, people will think, they'll look at a lengthy report and go, oh God, but they should really just take a few breaths, read through it, and decide, well, what did he say? If we wrote that the doors are deficient and it's just not latching, it's a simple repair, something that should be addressed, but it's not always something that they should panic or worry
Right.
about.
Totally.
As long as they understand that houses, require maintenance.
Of course.
I think that
Of
that's
course.
the key.
Any house, right?
Every
And even
property.
if it's a brand new home, there's still going to be a few pages and there's still going to be items that the seller probably missed because there's people working on a house and humans make mistakes, right?
Right.
So
New construction, sometimes they tend to have a lot more things that are just not finished,
Right.
not complete. Maybe
Yes.
the dishwasher hasn't been installed yet, or maybe they
Correct.
made an error on the roof or
Right.
left out part of a system.
makes sense.
It does make sense, and a lot of times the code enforcement inspector won't see it or won't cover that,
Right.
or it wasn't part of what he was looking at. They're in and out pretty quickly. We take a closer look
Right.
at the house and spend more time. So the builder can use it to turn out a better product, and I think the best outcome is when the builder takes the report and uses it as a list, something to assist them rather than argue with me or argue with the buyer about we're not going to fix this, we're going to fix that.
Right. I
But it's
agree.
all up for negotiation.
Of course. And I always tell my clients, I don't know if you agree with that, even if they're buying a brand new home, just go through the inspection process. It doesn't, I know the house is under warranty, but a few $100s here and there, I think it'll help a lot.
It's a good investment, and I think that might be one of the misconceptions is that new construction,
Right.
they might think that it doesn't need to be inspected because
True.
the builder has inspectors, the
Right.
city sends out inspectors,
course.
but the key is having an inspector that works for the buyer.
Right.
As the Texas Real Estate Commission requires, I'm only allowed to share the report that I create with the paying party
Right.
and their realtor as long as they're okay with that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Very good. And based on your experience, if you're working with a client that is buying a resale, what other inspector or what other type of inspections do you recommend the buyers to hire? Like separate from you, you are the mechanical structural inspector. I would say pest control. Like the termite inspector.
Yeah, wood destroying insects is one of them. That's
Okay.
a really good one.
Right.
And virtually any property, even new properties, can have termite infestation. There are other insects included in those inspections, but the vast majority of what we see are either subterranean termites, probably
Okay.
the most common,
Right.
or drywood termites.
Okay.
They live in the ground and they move their colonies in the springtime. So you might have been fine for 30 years, then all of a sudden
Right.
you have a termite problem. Or you might not have noticed because they don't make noise or anything.
Yeah.
And they work in dark places that are concealed.
Right.
You might have had a termite issue for 10 years and not known about it.
And the whole wall, it
Can
should
get
go.
bad.
Yeah.
That would take, I would say, a decade or more before very much structural damage
Okay.
is done. But it's important to find out about it and treat for it and have a
Okay.
plan in place,
Right.
to go and re-inspect it periodically.
Okay.
A lot of times on brand new construction, my clients don't get termite inspections. We have seen them on brand new houses,
Right.
but it's less likely to have them in a brand new home. But
Okay.
it's certainly possible.
Right.
They just live in the ground. If they build
Yeah.
a structure made out of wood, which the termites like, they'll build their tunnel up the side of the slab,
And that's the start.
and that's where they get started. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't usually make too big of a deal about it if they forego termite inspection, but I always indicate in the report that they should have one prior to
Okay.
closing, so
Good.
they're aware.
Good.
Other inspections that they could do, swimming pool inspections are
Swimming
important.
pool, right.
I've taken a class in pool inspections. I prefer to use one of my specialists.
Okay.
They do an excellent job. They've serviced and repaired and installed swimming pools and equipment before.
Right.
So I think for a little bit extra money, it's a good value. They're going to get a much more detailed look at the pool, a separate report,
Right.
and that allows me to focus on the house.
Of course.
But everybody's different. Some inspectors will do the pool as well.
Okay.
I feel like it's a little bit more cursory and less detailed. But
Right.
everybody has a different take on it.
Absolutely. And for those who are thinking of buying and they haven't gone through the process of inspection, and I get these questions all the time, how much usually costs an inspection? I know it may varies if it's a big company, an independent
Sure.
inspector or so on. Can you give me a price, range?
The
here
very
then?
lowest anybody should really be looking to spend on a home inspection. They start sometimes in the 300s.
Okay.
I started off in the business. I think my very first inspections were about $250. I was in the early 2000s, but
Okay.
I'm kind of a middle price guy. I think most people, if you're buying a 2,000 square foot house, you could pay anywhere from low end $350 upwards of $400 or $500 somewhere in there.
Okay.
I think most of the houses I try to get around $400 per inspection. Every
Right.
house is different though.
Okay.
Age and the size are the two biggest factors, and then you have items.
see.
How many ACs does it have? What type of exterior? What type of
Right.
a roof?
Okay.
Items like that. that can add to the fee.
Right.
But you mentioned earlier, it's a good investment to have a home inspection done.
Yeah.
You're investing a lot of money into buying real estate. You might as well have a good look at the overall condition of the various systems. Right. And then from there, a lot of times due to negotiating, it'll kind of end up paying for itself. You might get cash allowance for repairs,
right.
or they can kind of lower the price. I've seen people walk away from a deal before,
right.
and decide, well, that was going to be a big investment of time and money to right. rehab the place after
right.
we take possession. So whatever they want to do with it is up to them, but I think it's generally a valuable, it's a good value. You pay totally a few $100s for a lot of information on the property.
Right, totally. And I've seen sellers reducing up to $10,000, $15,000 of their price after an inspection. And once they see the report, you can justify why you're asking for such a big reduction and so on.
Right.
Just by looking at something without an inspection doesn't give the seller the reason, to justify why.
Right. When there's a third party that issues the TREC required report, and we have to be objective and non-biased in our findings, that gives you a little bit more leverage to say, okay, well, this is what our TREC inspector has found. Let's work off of that, rather than I would really like to have new windows in this house.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want to spend $30,000 on windows.
Right.
So it's an interesting process, and it's really valuable. I enjoy doing it and feel like I'm helping people make these decisions.
Absolutely. It's very important what you do, and I thank you again. Is there anything you want to add for those who have never been through the process of doing an inspection, never bought a house, or those who actually have done it many times but they still have concerns and things like that? What can you tell us?
Well, they should contact me or any inspector that they like, and then ask the questions that they have, or go online and look for information about TREC inspections. The Texas Real Estate Commission has a lot of information on their website. I could offer sample reports if they want to look through what does the typical home inspection report look like. And it has every heading. We'll show them which areas of the house are covered. So there's a lot of information online, but the bottom line is that if you're going to be putting that kind of money into it, you should do a little bit of work. It's sort of like if someone's buying a used car, usually we'll take it to a mechanic, or at least look at it themselves and decide what condition it is in, beyond the paint and the upholstery. So there's a lot of different systems. There's a lot of areas. So they really should pay attention to it and enjoy getting into it. And most inspectors will be happy to have them on site during the inspection, so they can demonstrate the findings, show them in person what they're finding, and ask questions and give them a little bit of background and education on why these systems are doing what they're doing. What's the source of these issues? Or
sometimes it's just simply peace of mind, right? That the house is good. Don't worry, this is all cosmetic. Nothing is gonna.
Every now and then I inspect houses that are in really excellent condition, and I can show them that and say, "Wow, this is really better than the majority."
Good shape.
Yeah. There's always something, but there are the few houses where they are very minor.
Of course.
Some people really maintain their property very well.
Right. That's so true. Thank you so much, Chris. Again, how can people get a hold of you? How can they find you?
Well, the best way is by my telephone. My number is 713-498-9896, and I'm always happy to have conversations, and I can direct them to my website as well.
Very good. Thank you very much again, and thank you everybody for watching the Houston Real Estate Talk with Stone & Fields. Thank you.